Welcome to Talk OT to Me, the podcast where we get nerdy but stay real about the world of operational technology.
Here we dig into the issues shaping modern manufacturing.
Let's talk OT.
Welcome to Talk OT to Me with Sycomea. My name is Jesper Andersen, and I'm the Global Director of Customer Success, Professional Services, and a bunch of other things here at Sycomea. But mainly I'm here because I really want to talk OT to you. So hello to you, Justin. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jesper? Thanks for joining today. My name's Justin Powell, and a senior cybersecurity engineer also here with Sycomea in North America. I'm excited about OT. It's something that gets me up in the morning. Obviously, it's my job, but it's also my passion. So I'm excited for what we're going to chat about today.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to talk to you. I hope you're getting ready to go to Christmas. There's not a lot of working days left before it's Christmas.
I know time. We're like maybe a week away, give or take. I got to get some more shopping done, but
before you get there,
we're getting there. Yeah.
Yes.
I know what I'm doing this weekend.
Yes. Yeah. Before we go to Christmas. Yeah. And hopefully all production is running smoothly out there with people no big before the holidays. This is I don't know how it is in the US, but in Denmark at least, this is the biggest production month in all of Europe. This is December.
Yeah, for sure. Got to get things done before the end of the year.
Yeah. Mainly on the food side for us here in Europe, getting all the food out there to the hungry people for Christmas is the main part of the production here, at least in Denmark. Denmark is a big production for food company.
Yeah. And you just reminded me of this because obviously that's kind of one of the things we want to talk about today. Because I just read a statistic, I had no idea, that manufacturing accounts for 26% of all cybersecurity attacks in critical sectors. So OT cybersecurity attacks. And so as we ramp up production, it's just also a reminder that gotta make sure we keep things safe.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Especially in the food industry. Like I think Europe has really woken up to the geopolitical risk here. So primarily my day spent talking to food companies in one way or other form, whether it's canned or produced food here in Europe, all around that, because like the geopolitical risk and tension here is fairly high. And I think those are one of the sectors that we can definitely feel. It's not just compliance driven here in Europe, also with NIS2, of course, but it is definitely also a feeling of a geopolitical risk shift where governments and interest groups are starting to get very aware that at least here in Europe, that the pressure on food companies is very high on the OT risk side.
For sure. And I definitely, as we talk today, I have a note here. I definitely want to talk to you about the regulatory compliance framework in Europe versus where we are in North America. But before we get to that, because that's, I think, the meat of where we're headed, I wanted to try to define some terms, because I know this was always frustrating to me when I first got into this space, because you have people who say OT, IoT, ICS, SCADA.
Yes,
there's all these different terms.
Yes.
Which, OT is operational technology, just so we're all on the same page. ICS is industrial control systems. SCADA is a different supervisory control network. But what we're really saying is when we talk about OT, and correct me if you think this is wrong, but when I talk about OT, what I'm talking about, I'm trying to differentiate it from the information technology or the IT world, where the IT world is primarily about bits and bytes and data, whereas the OT world is something that connects to the physical world and has some sort of physical control. So it might be a pump, it might be a manufacturing machine, it might be a motor, it might be something like that.
Yeah.
So my term of art, when I say OT, I generally mean everything we just talked about: ICS, OT, SCADA, all those different subsystems. And again, last but not least, you have everybody that talks about IoT or the Internet of Things. And that's kind of a gray area, to be honest, because it may be something that interacts with the physical world. It may just be data, but it's the blending of basically the distribution of chips into smart devices that are now impacting the OT network. So it might be a camera, it might be, some sort of sensor in an oven or whatever, but it's this increased connectedness. So just so we define terms here.
Yeah, and we're not talking about your fridge at home, even though that is a very interesting topic. But we are talking about the fridge in some sort of industrial bigger plant, and that can also be an industrial kitchen. But we're talking in like the bigger size. But this is where the IoT thing becomes a gray area, because what are you putting those chips into, and what are you accessing there? and what is
for sure.
the impact of it? Because
So high level question is something I was thinking about as I was preparing for this podcast. What do you view as the major differences or concerns about IoT security versus IT security?
Yeah. So I think that the main part of it, like there is a lot of differentiation between it. I think it's becoming more and more clear. I think we had a period where you were just saying, oh yeah, we can take the same OT, we can take the same IT standards over into OT. We tried that, it poorly worked. And I think for me, part of why it poorly works is this about like, there is just a mountain of difference between securing data, and you're also securing data in OT, but it's not your laptop and your bits you're securing there. It is a physical thing you're securing there that has a real physical impact out there. And the environment are, yes, there are overlap, but it's very different from how we structure our networks, how we set up things, what are we connecting to, what's the protocol we're using, and so the difference is there, and also the difference of impact. I don't think the impact is fully the same. Like, yes, it's expensive
sure.
when you get locked out of your Outlook for your whole company. That's expensive, but it's easier to recover and protect against. Good backup will get you a long way there, but if you do the same thing in OT, then the downtime and getting back there can be a lot longer, and the impact can be a lot harder. At least when you're sending your people home because your Outlook is locked down, the only cost is you're using business, but you send them home. There is third-party effects of suppliers, spoilage of stuff, all of that
Right.
has an impact there.
Yeah, and to add something to that people might not be aware of, there's actually a potential loss of life function too. And I'll give you an example. I have a customer. They weren't my customer at the time this happened. It's how they became my customer. But it was a large car manufacturer here in North America. And I don't know if it was a third party or if it was their IT team came into their factory floor and just wanted to identify devices on the network because they didn't have a good, this is quite a few years ago, but they didn't have a good inventory of devices. They didn't know what was connected to that network. So they just did an Nmap scan, which, IT guy, makes perfect sense. No worries.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, the problem in this particular factory is there was very large robotic arms that move the chassis of the cars as they're building them. And when that machine got hit with the Nmap scan, it literally reverted to its default position, which was like 98 degrees away from where it normally was. And if the factory was thankfully the factory was not operational. It was late at night and it was managed downtime. When it reset, had that happened during a regular workday, it would have most likely killed 2 people because of where their workstations were, and things like that. You bring down a website, that's bad. You kill people with a machine from an Nmap scan.
Yeah.
Now that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that's what also makes this really interesting to work in OT is that OT security is that there's really something on the line. Like geopolitically, there is this hey, we are onshoring again, whether you're talking Europe or US. Everybody's talking about onshoring again, how important it is for the individual countries. But the impact of something goes wrong. Like we have a lot of companies that are also in the chemical business. Something like that, if you then hit with it that open a valve, you're right next to the river, the impact can be quite severe. So you're actually protecting something that has a lot of real value and that has a lot of it can have an influence on people's life, on the environment. And I think that's why I sort of really think OT security is cool, because you have the real understanding that your day-to-day actually do make quite a big difference out there. And what you're protecting is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's honestly, you just described why I'm in this space, right? I think there's an opportunity to make a difference. And sadly, again, it's improved. OT, ICS cybersecurity is way behind where IT security was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even this year.
Yeah.
It's definitely lagged. Is that true? Is that true in Europe as well?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So, yeah. And I think, to be honest, I think Europe had a bigger room to cover than the US. It primarily had to cover, I think, because you were such a big target globally. You had a lot more incidents over a span of years, where Europe really sort of had a few bad ones that really hit home. Maersk being one of them, and a few others that hit home, just like you have the column pipeline that got hit. But I think Europe had a few bad ones that woke them up, and then geopolitically, the situation there, Europe being more forcefully. So Europe had a lot of growing up to do. Sometimes I just think about like also in terms of growing up OT cybersecurity people. If you look at US versus Europe, you have a lot more. I mean, we are woefully short of IT, OT, IT cybersecurity people in around the globe, but Europe has a much more ground to cover there in getting it up. It's something like as we as a company are very clear on, that we are growing that stack. We're growing our employees, growing the team that sits with me and others into this space, because if we really need as a continent to grow up there as OT cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I think the US is still struggling with that as well.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, it's kind of a weird little world where at least in the US, we have people that are sort of OT engineers or process engineers, mechanical engineers, and then obviously you have IT engineers and cybersecurity engineers.
Yeah.
But they speak kind of different languages.
Yes.
Because they care about different things. And so because of that, it's almost like, not that they fight, but they just don't, again, they speak different languages. It's almost like they need marriage counseling to get along.
Yes.
Because one person's saying one thing,
definitely.
but the other person's hearing something else, and something's lost in translation along the way.
Yeah. I stood in one of these conferences that you and me go to, and I literally had OT cybersecurity on one side of me, IT cybersecurity on the other, being out about in the town together. And for some reason, it sort of ended up that they stood on each side, and their boss, the chief technology officer, was sort of standing in the middle, and he was literally sort of panning back and forth, trying to get them to understand each other's world. Me standing in the middle, trying to say how our solution can sort of bridge both gaps, because there is a bridging of gap, but the marital thing is really real there sometimes.
Yeah, and again, because they care about different things. They care about, I mean, the concept of uptime and availability on the OT side is very different than on the IT side.
Yes,
which drives different priorities.
Yeah,
but because of that, that creates potential risk, right? Because if you have an IT guy that says, okay, we're going to implement, I won't name any products, but XYZ product solution, which works great on the IT side, the OT guy might be like, there's no way we're installing that in our system. And the IT guy's like, why are you such a jerk? And the OT guy's like, why are you trying to take my factory down?
Yeah.
And so it's just
and Persis is standing in the middle of saying, hey, this is way cheaper. And OT is trying to say, yeah, but how much downtime are you going to cost me with this one? Yes, it's a different price point. Yes, it's easy to roll out. But what is it? Hey, hang on here a second. If I lose half an hour on this a year, then can I gain half an hour on this over here? Then that's twice the bill that we're looking at. So they're sort of standing there. And I think that's very telling that it's a long road. And I also think one of the things I often think about, and I also talk to a lot of chief cybersecurity officers about that, is that you have to think a little bit of how do you build the OT power base inside of companies? Because a lot of times OT cybersecurity was also something done by the OT guy on the floor. Maybe he had a security education pass certification on the side or not, but it was him who's doing it. Now you're taking those people, pulling them into a global state. And I meet with a lot of companies around the world. This is my job, to meet with chief operational officers around the world. And the thing I see and I talk to them about is, what does your power base internally look like? Like, what does your structure look like? Because a lot of them, they maybe only have 1 or 2 years as a global OT function, and they're still figuring out how to operate within the company. The people you plucked from the office floor that maybe is oversaw 1 or 2 factories, or maybe if they're lucky, a division, now they're doing it on a global scale. And that means that they have to think very differently about how do they build stakeholders, how do they run projects, procurement. All of that part of it needs to be built up around OT. So sometimes I think, it's a fight between, or not fight, but it's getting OT and IT security together. But it's also understanding that you need to establish OT inside of your organization, because I do see a very big gulf between the companies that we work with that has clearly strategically thought about this from the get-go of the OT, and still strategically think about how to place their OT cybersecurity inside their organization. So whether you have good OT or not, the global part of this is real for a lot of companies, and you can clearly distinguish between the people that has really built out the OT security function and strategically over years, and the ones that are getting started, and it's less of a less well built out, less well understood inside the organization.
For sure. And, solving that gap or overcoming that gap is one of the key things that I see with organizations in the US, because I rarely see IT security experts become OT security experts. More often, what I see in companies that are successful is the other way around. It's the OT guy that understands the factory, understands PLCs and HMIs and everything that goes into that world, starting to understand IT cybersecurity. Maybe it's a regulatory compliance framework. Maybe it's just, hey, he's interested in that side of the world. When I see those OT guys move into the corporate IT side, as you just described, that's where I see that gap getting bridged most effectively.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And we have a lot to learn from the IT. So like that partnership really makes a lot of sense. We can learn a lot from IT on a lot of fronts in OT, but it makes very much sense that it's the OT guy who are moving in there. And the other way around can be done. We definitely seen that, but it takes a lot of learning and a lot of growing from it. And I had a really good experience around this where an IT cybersecurity guy was moving into the OT space, and he had a CISO that came from OT, and he was very good at saying, okay, you got to go to the plants first. You got to learn that part of it. He was very strategic in bringing this IT guy along, and that worked very well. So I also think it's about you as a CISO. How do you think about bridging that gap there?
For sure. And I know 5 years ago-ish, I would be having conversations with CTOs or CISOs trying to convince them that, hey, you need to take this side of the business seriously from a security perspective. And I don't think, at least in the US, the maturity wasn't quite there yet, again, depending on what industry we're talking about. Some are more advanced than others. But there was a report that an OT cybersecurity company came out with, Dragos, called the 2025 OT Security Financial Risk Report. And they called lack of OT security the $1 billion blind spot of for IT focused companies, obviously.
Yeah.
And they estimated that that total related cyber risk on the OT side could reach a little over $300 billion next year, which is insanity. I mean, that amount is huge. It's just staggering.
Yeah.
So
yes.
So,
but again, we've seen enough proof point for that to be clear. Like that makes all the sense in the world. You have had a few that has been publicly attacked in the US, and the bills quickly runs into the billions. And we've seen a few that runs into the tens of billions. So that number makes total sense. And again, like going back to, if you talk like OT as the new frontier in the cyber front, I definitely think that is true, both for geopolitical reasons, but also just from the fact that the maturity level in IT has grown, meaning you go where there's least resistance. And when you get to the OT layer, first of all, if you do get in, the impact you have is huge. So the hackers can both, whether it's adversary hackers or the states, but also for financial reasons, if you do get in, the payout can be quite big. And also the way in there sometimes can be through very low bars. It's often harder to find your way in, but once you find a way in, it's easier to get in.
Yeah,
that's at least my experience. I don't know what you think.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think honestly, if you go back 10 years ago, there was this concept that, it's security through obscurity, or we're air gapped, or we're not connected to the internet.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there was this false security that, hey, we don't need to do cybersecurity inside the plant because we're not exposed to anything. It's kind of like living in a castle and going, oh, we don't need an army because we have a moat, right? And then somebody gets over the moat, and now what are you going to do? And because of that, I think you're exactly right. The network segmentation in those sort of factories was pretty non-existent, to be quite honest. So once you were in, you had full ability to laterally move to any device from, at any level of the Purdue diagram functionally. And we've seen adversaries, particularly nation state actors, take advantage of that in compromising devices that maybe they haven't even exploited yet, but they've, have the ability to do it in the future.
Yeah, like the average, I think the average is like that we're saying that they have been 6 months to 9 months into the network when the attack strikes. And I think that the security by obscurity thing really is a bad strategy. I know that it happens a lot, and a lot of the old way of seeing OT was there, but it's a very, very different. It's a very, very, of course, I think OT has a big play in not being sort of showing everything. Is also part of our solution. How we think about how we design remote access is a lot about making sure that if a user get compromised, they can't see the full scope of the network on a site. They can only see just a little slice of it to make sure that you can't scan. Because a part of it is also, if you get into like that's always something I think about in OT cybersecurity, is that you have to not just think about them getting in, but you definitely also have to think them not being able to see too much. Because once you're in and once they can navigate your network, it's very hard to find around a OT network sometimes. Like you and me know how internally sometimes like it can be hard to figure out where the hell is that PLC.
Yeah, exactly. How do I connect to that?
Yeah, how do I connect to that? That's a real hassle inside OT, and it just provides some security, but it shouldn't be your design phase. But we definitely think about that in our product. But I think in general, having that is, you need to move away from that.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk more about sort of those best practices here in a second, but you just reminded me of something. In my experience here in the US, oddly enough, one of the biggest changes that I've seen in customer networks actually is because of COVID-19. So,
yeah, interesting.
It's 5 years ago now. It seems like a lifetime ago, and it seems like yesterday. But if you remember at the time, people were locked down, depending on what country they were, or in our case, what state, there were different rules. And so you had to get access to certain things, but oftentimes there were rules. Oh, you can't go in the office, you can't do whatever. And so I had very large customers that would create random remote access or VPNs into a network without any other security precautions, without any design thoughts. Yeah. Because it was an emergency, right? Yes. It was, hey, we've got to do something now.
Yes.
Well, here's the problem, right? When you do that, I mean, I understand why we did it, and it had to be done from a global perspective. But now we're having to fix what I'm seeing. My customers are having to fix decisions they never actually consciously made. They never said, oh, I'm going to open up my entire manufacturing plant to the internet, but they did. Or, hey, I'm going to open up my entire water distribution network to the internet. But they did, and you saw it in the Oldham water hack that they had given remote access, VPN access to employees, and a disgruntled employee got access. At least that's how I understand the story, because that was never, they didn't contemplate, hey, do we want to do this? It was, hey, we have to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And then what sort of followed was that might have been, okay, we ended up there. But then what I also think about when you talk about OT security, I also talk about something like, then you made an emergency thing, but then because you didn't have your process and structure around how you dealt with your OT firewalls, then that never got cleaned up again. And not just didn't it clean up, then we got a remote, then we came in with a project, and then we opened some other, but we never cleaned up those firewall walls. And I think back to the standards of what I see is a lot of times where we are in OT on the new frontier, it's not always the new shiny thing. A lot of the times it's getting back to, are you actually covered your bases there? Have you cleaned up after yourself, so to speak, in a sense, like,
which is IT security standard?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, in that you're touching on a pet peeve of mine, because I've had lots of customers who've come to me and said, oh yeah, we're air gapped. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You're not connected at all. Like, no, we're air gapped through the firewall. I'm like, no, you're not. By definition, that's not air gapped. But they're like, yeah, it is. There's a firewall. I'm like, yes, but in theory, firewalls have issues, but more likely than not, you've opened something on that firewall, and now you may not have meant to do it, or maybe you meant to do it and then get rid of it. And maybe you trusted, one of your junior network engineers to fix that. Yeah. But again, you've introduced risk to the system without taking into account what that means.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we talk about these standards here in Europe, the legal pressure from these TOW and Cyber Resilience Acts coming later is going to force some of this to be done, because the fines are quite heavy. But the truth is, the ICE 62443 standards, a lot of companies are still struggling just to get close to that.
Yeah, for sure.
And to fulfill it is a way.
All right. So I know you mentioned the IEC 62443. The way I don't know a lot about European OT cybersecurity regulations, but I know that you guys are you're definitely further along than the US when it comes to mandatory compliance and required regulations. Tell me a little bit about that environment.
Yeah, I think we are, especially within these two, we are definitely further along than you guys are. And I think this will have a very clear impact on the cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity state in Europe. So NIS2 is basically focus on critical infrastructure first, and then you can sort of decide what you think is critical infrastructure. It lays out some clear things that are, but then again, like what is the third order effect of you delivering to a critical infrastructure part, then you're also included in that. But basically it sets out good cybersecurity hygiene, I would almost call it, sort of minimal standards for what you need to do, which a lot of companies aren't going to clear. And a lot of companies have a lot of growing up to do to get there. And it also sets out, there are personal fines, companies fines for the company, but they are also a standard of saying, hey, you need to do what is needed to secure without being sort of totally clear on it. So I think what is good about the standard is
interesting.
It sets out like who's this for, that there are impacts if you don't do your due diligence and you don't keep up. So there are some pressure there from a financial point of view. And then it sets out what is good cybersecurity standards without being sort of so clear that it becomes a burden that you can't design your own network, but it sets out some clear standards. For example, like around remote access, which is the space that you and me often spend a lot of time in. That's set out, hey, you have to make sure you are in control. And then you have to define what is in control. And that's probably going to be flushed out over time legally in the court systems. And also different countries have different setup. For example, Denmark, where we are in, is one of the more aggressive. And then also France is one of the more aggressive in how they can interpret it. So there's going to be some interpretation difference there. But it has had a huge impact already for Europe. A big increase just in a year or two, where it really makes an impact very fast. So I think that's needed in Europe, and this is very good.
Yeah, and I would say in the US, that what you're saying there is, I always describe it to customers as the frameworks are descriptive, not proscriptive. They tell you the types of things you should be doing, but they don't tell you exactly how to do them. And in our environment, with the exception of some very regulated industries like nuclear power and electricity and a few other ones that have a strong regulatory framework that's required, like manufacturing in the US, most of the regulatory frameworks are voluntary. And it's something like NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 is probably the one I see the most, where companies are aspiring to say, hey, we want to meet that standard, which is great. And they should. Yeah. But to your point, sometimes it really is so descriptive or it's only descriptive, and companies have to figure out what does that look like. So I think you're right. As it gets more mature, particularly on the OT side of that cybersecurity framework, we'll get to some maturity. And again, I think we maybe started ahead of you guys, but I'm not seeing a ton of customers who are concerned about it having to implement a framework or get fined again, unless they're in a very regulated critical space.
Yeah. And what we're also seeing is it's sort of having NIS2 is having an effect over the pond, in the sense that a lot of US companies has production in Europe. So at least for those sites, they need to deal with the different regulations. And that sometimes I've seen that has some food for thought, where this makes a ton of sense to implement this. Why don't we just take it to all our factories? If we're doing Europe, we might as well do US or Asia Pacific or something.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
to be
Let's
clear,
standardize.
To be clear to our American audience, you said NIS2, not NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. So that's a NIS2, NIS2 is a European specific standard, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So interesting, huh? Yeah, and maybe that is a way for us in the US to catch up, because as for large global companies, is they implement a framework, in the EU. Maybe it does sort of bleed back to North America, which would be great.
Yeah. And I think also maybe on your side of it, it's going to be interesting to see how the insurance companies is going to get more involved in there.
Yeah, that's a big driver in the US. It has been for years now, because cybersecurity insurance rates have gone through the roof, because a lot of insurance companies have exited that space because the risk they hadn't quantified the risk enough. There wasn't enough data. And so they were losing their shirts, according to them. And so they exited that space. And so with fewer players providing insurance rates went way up. And now those insurers could say, this is what you have to do to keep insurance, which really means we're going to find, well, I don't want to say it this callously, but oftentimes the way it's worded is, if you don't do this, we won't pay if you have a breach, right? So it's this weird world where you're paying for insurance, but you've got to meet that requirement.
Yeah. Okay, Justin, this was a great talk. You and me can talk forever, which is why we're doing this Talk to Me OT. OT is the new cybersecurity frontier. That's definitely true here from Europe and also for the US. So great talking to you today, and then go get that last Christmas shopping done before you head to Christmas.
Close a couple more deals before the year's over, and get some companies a little more secure, and then enjoy some time with family. So I hope you get a break as well. So I appreciate the time today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to me, and see you soon.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
See you. Bye.